We think in ideas. Like I see the abstracts, I understand the connections, but ask me to explain it, and I come across sounding like a babbling idiot sometimes.
It's trying to explain a three-dimensional model in a two-dimensional way.
Yeah, with a two-dimensional vocabulary.
To a two-dimensional brain. You start talking about, and we're in 10 dimensions, color and texture and all of these things, not only the linear of it, and so they just look at us like we're whacked. People come into the Driven Identity or the Driven Mastery program because they are very much searching for this who I am, and that this what Driven is a different brain structure that does not support a farmer's brain's identity. And so as children, we are taught that we should know who we are. And this individuation from our parents, we are in this constant state of trying to say me, not me. And that is how most identities are formed. And so when we're born, and this is captured well in one of my YouTube videos. In fact, the most popular YouTube video, really about how the sense of identity is created. And it's a interactive, when we are born, we're basically born a ball of meat. And we are completely dependent upon our mothers and our parents or our tribe to keep us from getting eaten by saber-tooth tigers or anything else that an eagle could come and take us. And so we are very much enmeshed as one with the tribe. And we have, we're born probably 5 years, 8 years too soon. And so we should be in a pouch, but we are not. And so our energy systems, our identities are completely one with other. And at about 3 weeks of age, we come out of a period of something called normal autism. And this is important to understand. Margaret Mahler is one of the primary researchers about identity development. And another person named Winnicott that I really like. There's some good research around really this poor identity formation. But normal autism, and what autism is, the original kind of understanding of it, is a very confused sense of boundary between me and other. And so literally, when we are born, we can't tell if something is a threat or a danger or a discomfort is coming from inside of us or outside of us. And so we are just crying. And it is up to our parents to figure out why we're upset. And at about 3 weeks of age, we start to come out of normal autism, because when we figure out that hunger makes us upset, makes our central nervous system dysregulate, here comes a giant boob. And this giant boob then makes us feel better. So something outside of us can make the inside of us better. And that is the normal kind of separation between self and other, subject and object. And autism is literally, they believe, a spectrum where the energetic awareness or this boundary between our awareness of self and other is confused. And so Driven being on spectrum, and that there's some connection there. We don't know what it is, but it's there. But for most people, 95% of the human population, 90% of the human population, the executive function, that this little ball of energy is a linear machine that tells us very simply that me, not me, is very clean. If I run towards the street is something dangerous. Mom will yell at me, causing an external thing to cause an internal thing to send signals of danger up to my brain and telling me I don't want to be in the street. That's not me, and that's bad. And here I am. But Drivens, for whatever reason, we have this executive function deficit, which is the defining feature of ADD and ADHD. And so this who I am. And so the identity piece is really the foundation of what I do, is change people. So driven mastery is a process of discovering what we are. That really is. And it takes time to do that. But when we are at this walking into us, the identity is very confused. And, I don't say it, but these practices, our behaviors, our routines in this world are largely chaotic. And what we're creating is a bunch of fucking chaos. And so our identities, this circle, and here's what we're pooping out is this big identity issue of shame. Because of our practices and what we're creating, what we poop out there is chaos and unstable. Because of our identity is so confused and full of shame, we are impulsive and chaotic is what we're pooping out. So that is really the result of not being in a driven mastery program. This is the issue, is our world is full, our identities are shameful. What we're creating is a bunch of chaos and unstable, unpredictable outcomes. We sabotage a lot. And that's because we have this impulsive, chaotic behavior.
The definition of chaos, because I think that's, people looking into my world, looking into my brain, they go, wow, you're all over the place. You're chaotic. But honestly, to me, it makes sense. I see the order in my world. Is that a fair comment?
Very fair. Because we have this thing called hypofrontality. So the missing frontal lobe is not the missing executive function in the left prefrontal is, an underactive or hypofrontal cortex is actually not accurate. We have a very active frontal lobe, but it's on both left and right hemispheres. The left is more logic and rational, where the right is big picture, abstract. And so, as I always joke, a farmer sees the world as a series of logical sequential steps. We see the world as one big ball of opportunity. Then our left hemisphere can put lines and structure to this chaos, and that's why non-tangential people drive us insane. It's like we drive them nuts because what the fuck are you talking about? How is this connected to water polo? And you're like, why can't you see? It's
right there.
Right. And so they literally have a different world. But what this chaos and instability and impulsivity creates is a very diffuse, whacked out identity. We don't know who we are. We're Da Vinci's. We are all over the map. We are good at 18 different things and masters of most of them. I mean, we are really, but it requires this focus, and we only focus on things that have a dopaminergic reward to them. They excite us. They make us interested. And so, as a farmer looks at us, it's impossible for this person that's presented in this to survive in this farmer logical W-2 sit in a cubicle world. And, we look at them, and when, that's one of my favorite theories around driven, is that we are really the ones waiting for the next ice age. We're waiting for the world to become non-linear again. And, because of the Gutenberg's printing press on steroids, the cell phone and internet, and this rapidly changing world with AI, we are designed for the world that's unfolding in front of us. And so, the sheep, wolves, and shepherd book is so important because we are the ones who are going to bring order to the new rapidly changing world. But we have to do that in a very practiced way.
Based on the shame, I'd just like to point out, we hear a lot of things like, why can't you sit still? Why can't you focus? You need to focus on this thing, or you need to finish that thing. I think I hear a lot of, oh, why didn't you finish that? And it's like, because I got bored with it.
I figured it out and knew the outcome already. So why do I need to follow it all the way through to the end? And it is literally this farmer's world, and they mostly build their identities out of their practices and their routines. They are butchers and bakers and candlestick makers. And that simple identity based upon a linear routine where we're chaotic and all over the place, but we still need to build an identity. And so most of us, and what identity is the most consistent thing in our worlds. And the most consistent thing in a driven person world is this feeling or experience of not enough, boredom.
Would it be fair to say that practice, I'll use that in air quotes because I know there's the mastery practice and then there's the practice that we all do, but it's an accumulation of, childhood observations, childhood trauma, well-meaning farmer brains telling us things. The chaos comes because we don't know how to manage our brain. Is that fair?
Correct. Very fair. It is literally a Ferrari. And so the most recent research, when I wrote Driven, they really didn't have the functional MRI to the point where you could observe this default modal network. And the default modal network is basically the operating system of the brain. So you have all the parts and pieces, the hardware, general areas of, brain parts that are associated with certain things, but then you have the thing that's connecting all of those parts, and that's the default modal network. And we, as Drivens, have 3 times as many brain parts connecting at the same time and operating. Literally, we have 4 times as much electrical activity going through our heads. So if you think about, it's literally DOS 2.0 versus ISO 19. I mean, it is just 2 completely different operating systems. And so when God bless them, a second grade, third grade, fourth grade teacher with a, a operating system not like ours looks at us, they don't understand what the hell is going on. We look at them and, stupid, slow, and lazy. We look at them like, why can't you understand the complexity of what I'm trying to explain?
Yeah.
Well, you spelled it wrong. And it's like, well, I did, but don't you understand why it makes sense to spell it this way? And it's just, but it leads to this feeling of being outside the herd.
Yeah.
I remember where I started. We are so herd dependent that we need to feel like we fit in with the tribe. And so with the imposter syndrome, we wind up, chameleons.
Yeah. I'm just thinking out loud, Doug, that language is part of our newer brain. So we're probably like, we think in ideas. Like I see the abstracts, I understand the connections, but ask me to explain it, and I come across sounding like a babbling idiot sometimes. Is that part of the structure of the brain?
We're so tangential in making these connections, from it's trying to explain a 3-dimensional model in a 2-dimensional way.
Yeah, with a 2-dimensional vocabulary.
With a 2-dimensional brain.
Yeah.
The second you're like, I mean, where do you even, you start talking about, and we're in night 10 dimensions, color and texture and all of these things, not only the linear of it, and so they just look at us like we're whacked. But, my experience, and once I got into statistics and high order math, I was seeing variance in my head. I could see the, math in 3 dimensions, and how the hell do you see it that way? And it's like, that's the only way I can make sense of it.
Yeah.
And then you apply numbers to it. Oh, okay, I get it. And then, but trying to, explain that to a linear person, and you have some people just did not get statistics, where to me, it makes complete sense.
Well, it's funny, Doug, because myself and both my boys, the teachers say you need to show your work. It's like, but I know the answer. Why would I show my work? Like,
It's,
you need
well,
to see my work, but I don't need to show it. There's a,
yeah, well said. And that, so, that's why driven, that vernacular of this, who, and that's really where I go into the next, the first foundational step of this, um, is this really this deep understanding of identity. And this first, kind of core tenet is rather than a who I am, it's a, what I am. And again, the who I am is the shame, where the what I am is a rational binary. Yes, no, you are a mammal, period. And, when you look at what's happening in our society where there's more than one gender, and it's like, what the hell are you people talking about? Because you're applying it just makes this nonsensical. And it's literally nonsense. And so this is so important for our brains to really understand this binary identity. And once you get that, once you have this, and I circle okay here because that is the most important component of really knowing that you got these foundational principles of what I teach, because I am a mammal and I'm okay with that. Because then once you add judgment or I'm not a good one, a bad one, all of a sudden it becomes this who again. And so getting rid of the word just okay usually takes a while. Well, I'm just okay, which is the application of our drivenness to this binary thing. And so when we can really understand that I am an animal, period, and that's okay, that is a foundation for everything else that we build on.
and I think that just that rephrasing from who am I to what am I know that was a big thing for me reading the Driven book. But it was also understanding, I'm a mammal, I'm different, not broken. Taking away that judgment was huge.
Yeah. And that frees us from this shame and, frees us from the emotion. And once you can foundationally get that, then you can move on to the second one about how I function and how all mammals function. And this is the monkey and the elephants. And this is what I am is a mammal. I am driven. So yes, I am different. And we're all different. There's 8 billion central nervous systems on this planet, but how different drivens are. And even as we're finding out, within the drivens, there's different. And so I am different. And then that jump has to be, I am also okay with that. And that's I say that to everybody all the time. You're a monkey and you're driven. Well, I don't want to be. It's like, who gives a shit? This is what you are, period.
Yeah.
And this next piece about how I function and the monkey and the elephant and the observer, this Godhead is really what it is. This understanding, the triune brain. It's a triune understanding of identity, of really what we are. And so the monkey and the elephant and how I function is the basic biology of the limbic system pinging the radar that creates the unconscious. The neocortex, the monkey mind, is a problem solver. And they're trying to solve problems. And emotion is very simply an ability, it's the attempt to predict the future is why we have feelings. And so you touch a hot stove, you walk into the kitchen, unconsciously you go onto guard because that is a potential threat. It triggers, if it's strong enough, triggers a monkey mind. The monkey mind goes into threat detection then, and we see snakes everywhere. And so I got a bunch of videos on, the how I function piece, again, that self-identity and understanding how trauma then is really recorded in the body. And the observer, or our souls, are the ones that allow for change, because then we can observe the sensations in the body prior to them turning into a monkey mind chattering narrative.
Doug, while you're here, I assume you're going to get there, but explain that the voice in our head, because to me, that was as a child, the chameleon said, hide this voice. I feel
So this is what is so shocking for all the Drevins and shocking for me. And as I explain it to Drevins, it just explodes their head. But most people, kind of where I'm landing, 80 to 85% of people, because of the executive function, have a single thinker in their head. They only have the one voice. 65% of them, at least, do not have a listener, do not have someone hearing that thinker. And so it is this, they're literally, I imagine them much more like my Labrador, where they don't have a thought. They just, impulsive, and they, but they're structured. Their brain supports this routine. And so they wake up in the morning, they get out of bed, they take their shower, they brush their teeth, they do this and they do that, and that this is what I do all day long. They don't require someone questioning their thoughts. But in society, they are so stuck in their narratives. And we, as Drevins, who have 7 narratives going on all the time, and one listening to it, knowing all of them are full of look at these other people that have, God help us, just a narrative running with no one questioning it. It is just it is a completely different animal. But, that is normal. And so for you and me in 2nd and 3rd grade, why are you always questioning everything? Why do you, don't disturb the teacher of your letter? Just, why are you asking questions about this and that? And, well, how does that work? And it's, for someone who doesn't have our brain, we must be just a pain in the.
Yep. I always got that. Anyone have questions other than Jeff?
Exactly.
Jeff, put your hand down.
And it's, so how I function is different. And, the liberation about how other people function too.
Yep.
And so there is that, what I am is different and how I function is different. And that leads into this next, that is so important for Drevins, how I change. And, how do I change? This is all trauma healing. And, the trauma healing component is really getting these hardwired programs out of our body for the most part. There are real snakes in this world. And yes, people do steal money from you and have these things. So it's not, we're not advocating peace and love. And the world is a dangerous up place. But being able to curiously explore and question these innate impulsive, again, this impulsive chaoticness, and the ability to, is it a snake or a stick? Is the stove even on or not? Is it a threat or not? And so once we are able to actually step out of it, our reactions in our body, and this is where all of the content around bandwidth, and we have bandwidth for the elephant. The elephant has a certain amount of, how much tolerance we have for dysregulation before we go into action, before it becomes this chaotic, impulsive behavior. And so there's also bandwidth in our soul. And that is what really the Driven Mastery program is all about. How I can stay in the curious observer as my body goes into dysregulation and not react. It's my joke about meditation. The greatest thing meditation ever taught me was to shut the up. And why is that so important? Because it is my ability to actually not take this chaotic, unstable inner world and make it real. I may be chaotic on the inside, but if I don't put that into action, and I use a lot of Eastern philosophy for this, and I dive deep into it in a lot of the practices about, the word karma. This word karma is literally translated as actions. And so your actions create your world. No, it's like, wow, that's profound. But it's our subtle actions. It's these unconscious, minute facial reactions and half a smile and leaning out, leaning in, all of these things that are steering people's behavior around us. And, why I parked on the left and rather than the right, and all of these little things is what they're talking about. So we are becoming aware of our actions, and that actually learning to question them and let our soul, or let this curious observer make the decision about what to follow and what not, rather than the monkey mind.
I love that. And I think knowing the how of change is really powerful, because then I know we're going to get to practice and manifest, but if you know how to change, then you know how to practice.
Correct. And then all of your practices are serving this simple, what I am is a monkey. This is how I work. And I'm not going to let these impulsive karmic, reactions, my trauma, manifest. So what am I going to do? What I'm going to create practices that really give me the opportunity then to put my soul in the driver's seat. And, you get your egg timer and 20 minutes of email practice, or 20 minutes of doing my taxes practice, where I'm just focusing on that, is building this bandwidth of tolerance for, horrible circumstances for most drivens of doing paperwork. But I can do it for 20 minutes, and it is something that is actually good for my practice, good for me to develop this tolerance. But you start at 2 minutes and build up to 4 minutes and 8 minutes, and you build capacity. And so and over time, that's we have tons and tons of frozen trauma in our body. And if you take a big old block of ice and you put it into hot water, it will explode. And so this concept of titration, where you have a big vat of acid and you put a equal parts of base with it, it's going to. And so we take a little bit of base, a little bit of practice, and we drip it into this acid, and bubbles, and then comes bubbles, and then comes bubbles, and then comes. And so we're slowly, and that's better has no finish line. This is a mastery for life. And it's another joke I always say, if you can live in the observer all the time and fully embody the observer and be authentically present in no matter the circumstance, you're called a Zen master. Good luck. Have some kids. Go to the mall and go stand behind fat people as they're walking really slow and tell me how much Zen you have. Because drivens in a farmer's world is not easy.
Yep. I think the farmers were put here to give us time to practice getting back to Zen.
No, there are many people alive today because of my practice. So getting into the practices, the number one thing that we have to understand as a practice is this concept of locus of control, of really ownership, that the world is not happening to you. You are not a victim. But we are also, because of this shame piece, most drivens are way too high in their locus of control. We think everything is our fault. And our monkey minds then, our multi-thinking monkey minds can jump in and come up with 37 things that I did wrong, and it really is ultimately my own fault. And ownership of your life, that this is your life. This is not practice. Today is not preparation for some other day. This is your life. You're living it. And that ownership, I love Jocko Willink, extreme ownership, where you own, and this becomes very important for my entrepreneurs and CEOs that, ultimately, and fathers, ultimately it comes down to your responsibilities, to lead. And if you are the leader and, things are going awry, it is your fault, and as I am able to take ownership, in this wonderful word called integrity, integrity is a core tenet of our practice. And integrity means wholeness, that I'm able to fully see how I created my life.
Doug, I actually read an article, and it was one of those new age, so take it with a grain of salt, but they said literally you can't succeed. They studied success, and if you don't take ownership of everything, you can't possibly succeed because you don't see the need to change.
Right. And that is excellent point. Excellent point, because it is, what is my part in it? And that is, kind of the conclusion of this. How do you know you're actually in ownership? Is, as I always say, you come to this profound realization that the only problem you truly have in this world is yourself.
And that's an annoying observation.
But that is true.
But it's freeing.
But it's freeing in the sense that I can do something about that. And I truly have the power and the efficacy to do that.
The first time somebody gave me that insight, I was like, F you. I am not to blame. Life happens, blah, blah, blah. I can't control what happens. But after I met you and I started observing, I was like, oh my God, this is freeing, because and with the observer, you can see the things that I must take ownership of. And then there's things that I can't possibly, I can't control, let's talk about the US election here for a minute. I can't control whether the Americans vote for Trump or Harris, but I can control how I feel about it.
Right.
And I think, to me, that was just like,
that right there is so important to understand, because we live in a biased world, an attribution bias and self-fulfilling prophecy. We literally see what we feel.
Yeah.
And so, when I get into the routine next, and I get into the meditation practices and all these things, but it's a stable central nervous system that allows us to actually see reality more clearly. And when we see reality more clearly, we have more efficacy or ability to believe we can affect the world. That is where, it's driven. That it's like, oh, get out of my way. I can do something about this. I can manifest. I can start to create a life that is very different than, a 9-to-5 job stuck in a cubicle somewhere.
And, honestly, my sense of righteousness was for 50 years my biggest source of shame, because it was like, how come I'm not changing the world? Why am I not, I see this potential I have, and yet I see other people look at me and they use words like chaotic. My favorite is erratic. It's like, am I delusional? And now I see, well, here's the things I can control. I can be righteous about the things I can control. Things I can't control, I don't need to waste my energy on being righteous about them.
Gene, this is a key piece, going back to the identity and ownership. How does righteousness feel? It's not a feeling. Righteousness and justice And all of these words are soul words, are actually names for God. God is just, God is righteous, God is, and that is, that this observer, and that's, you can't bitter, but that is a soul awareness that somebody's trying to me. And it's not a feeling. It's not of the monkey or the elephant. It is of something bigger than me. And learning that is a step into really this discernment of being able to, how do I get rid of that? It is a discernment of really that monkey elephant observer. And that steps into, this ownership that I am just, I am kind, I am loving, I am these things. And, I use that I am. It's the same one that Moses heard. I am that I am. It is that I am. It is the bigger I am. And, that is the ownership that I am willing and able to actually see, that if a life coming from here, rather than the self, which is the biggest problem I have, is the monkey elephant identity, is the lowercase self. The bigger case, the capital S self, is the soul embodied. And that's really the punchline. That is the finish line for wherever we go. And if you can be always there, you're literally a Zen master. And, having your elephant not want to step on people's heads is not easy.
So it's okay that my elephant occasionally wants to stampede. That's good. It's funny because I noticed the monkey elephant, you call it lowercase self. My observer calls it selfish.
There you go.
Because you're internally focused, right?
Yep. And that selfishness, self-seeking, self-centeredness is the root of our problem, is what they say in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is largely a program for drivens.
Yeah. And so, holding on to that sense of self where we think we have control, but when we let go of it, then we actually have freedom, which is better than control.
And that is so key in where all this goes. And they'll probably come up again. But it is pride is the cornerstone of our problem. And pride is the original sin. Pride is the belief that my monkey mind can determine good and bad, or good and evil. And your soul is what humility is curiosity. With curiosity contains no judgment. And so that is the opposite of pride. And so we really are creating a humble identity. And what is, humble? I love, man, it's Murray writes a book called Humility. And the root word of humility is humus, Humus. And humus means earth or dirt. And that his insight is that we are dirt. And that was the Buddhist, Siddhartha Gautama's great insight, that I am nothing but earth. This breath is not mine. This breath is life. This breath is what God breathed into us.
Yeah.
And so it's a very deep philosophical understanding of what. But yes, when you think you're something other than dirt and you take credit for your breath, and that is what creates all the problems in the world.
Well, I read somewhere once, and I love this quote, that pride is the seed of all suffering.
Yes.
And it's interesting that you use the word dirt, because we're planting the seed of suffering in our soil.
You got it. And that is called trauma. And getting those seeds of suffering, which is just fear-based recordings in the body.
Yeah.
And, that all my content around pain and fear, there's only two things in this world, which is love and fear. And most people misunderstand how much love hurts. And, you lose a child, it is going to hurt beyond words. Why? Because you love them. And so love is pain. Pain is love. And we as a biological being are scared of pain. And that scared of pain, anything that causes pain is evil. And it's like, no, that's monkey mind. And that capacity to get that and then build this identity around it is that ownership. That I am not my monkey mind. I am not my elephant. I am also this observer stuck in this meat suit. And so what can I do about the meat suit is take responsibility for it. How do I do that? This is the routine and all of the routines and practice routine. And so this capacity to actually stay on a routine is only possible from the observer. And once the habit is formed in the elephant to monkey connection, you may go back to sleep, but these awareness of the habit. And so we're not creating new habits. We're actually creating new processes to stay in this observer elephant relationship. And that's a nuance, but that nuance is really important to understand that it is, we're not in habit, developing good habits is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is coming out of habitual, chaotic behaviors or nonsensical routines. Yeah. And what is the bigger purpose of this is actually of the soul, or of this ability to see the outcomes that we want and really take responsibility, then ownership of these routines, knowing what they're going to lead to a different outcome.
It's funny, Doug, because I've studied habits, and one that fascinates me is brushing our teeth regularly was a habit created by marketing companies to sell toothpaste. Now, it's a good habit, but the irony is we'll spend our time worrying about, which toothpaste should I buy, yet we're not doing the mental hygiene to clean our minds and our bodies.
Exactly. And so these routines, that foundational routine that I teach of 1 minute, 2 minutes of meditation first thing in the morning is there because we are most likely to be on autopilot. We're most likely to be driven by our cortisol in the mornings. And so being able to 2-minute practice, come out of that and feel the resistance. And that is the core, really, this identity when you wake up to the lowercase self, is you feel the resistance, you hear the monkey mind, immediately rationalize, justify, or whatever, and you don't do either. You are freed from the self for that moment. And there is no resistance in the present moment, is the core, really understanding how we change then comes into this practice of routine directly across. Why we're creating this driven mastery mastermind, I don't even know what you call this. It's a wolf pack. And again, going back to what we are as an animal, we are wired differently. And I will go out on a limb with this because we will catch some about it, I'm sure. But most herding animals, HERD animals, are wired from the fear-based system of the ventral vagal or the dorsal vagal system. And when a cheetah, when they get scared, they immediately go to selfishness and self-protection. Where we are wired, much more of our soul awareness, where we truly don't want to be alone in this world. And we have always felt alone, but felt misunderstood. And so we have to, it is an imperative to develop a wolf pack, meaning that we have other men, other people in our world that we experience them having our back. And that is core and foundational for how we change. Because when the traumatized animal goes into a pack of others that actually resonates with you, a spontaneous release of trauma happens. And we feel this desperate need for, we aren't lonely, which is a body response. We are alone in our souls. And when we, that's why we walk into rooms, masterminds or whatever, and you meet somebody and it's like, oh my God, I've known you my whole life. That instant deep connection that Drivens can have is our souls are being met by another person that knows that aloneness.
That's how I was going to ask you to explain that, because that to me was when I met you, it was like, holy, where have you been? Like, you've been in my life all my life, but where have you been? Because, and finding that wolf pack is huge.
And I have tried to avoid the hippy dippy my whole life. This, I always joke, if anyone ever figures out they really have the soul figured out and they know the levels and the names and all of this, it's a cult. It's because it is, it's like, nah, well, I read in this book. Yeah. And that was somebody else's ideas. So I really encourage people to stay in that curious space of, not trying to understand. That's the joke I always say is, the greatest gift I ever gave myself was understanding that my monkey mind cannot not comprehend God or soul or what the hell is really going on here.
I suspect most cult leaders are driven who went to the dark side. Just a hunch.
Well, that is very, very important. What you just said. I do use the word wolf pack because we are wolves. And what is a wolf is something that can prey on the sheep very easily. And we do. All my clients that were selling pills on the internet, and getting grandma's credit card, and, basically she has to cancel the credit card to get rid of them. And it is, we come up with very good ideas to make a lot of money. And we have the propensity to become addicted to power. And, Goebbels and Hitler, they are drivens. They are of our, neurodivergent way, and they see how they can manipulate the masses to feed their pride, to feed their egos, to feed their monkey elephant small identities, and they can rationalize and justify it. Well, they're trying to make the world a better place, and Stalin and all the others that, rise to power. And it's comforting to know that, as, Bobby Kennedy has aptly said, when they turn on the lights to look at big pharma and big food, there isn't a central organizing evil mastermind behind it. It's a bunch of cockroach driven making a bunch of money on the slide. It's like a bunch of cockroaches running for the corners, and the lights come on. So, but it is, and so this driven mastery is really about people willing to work on their wolves, willing to go back to that pride thing and, give up the original sin, give up this concept that, our monkey minds can determine what is good and evil. And, really using AI, that is what I think is going to happen is, we, as one of my clients, Steve, says, 2-3 drivens in every single branch of government using AI to determine, statistically what's best for most. Yeah. And as Thomas Murray always says, that there is no good and evil. Everything's a compromise. And, what are we willing to compromise? And as AI gets better, we can really see, potentially what we are creating, but feeding a bunch of people, addictive chemicals so you can make money. I mean, that's not right. I can't say it's evil, but it's not right, and that I can, so what is right? Well, how do we get more people healthy and live happier lives?
Well, and Doug, ironically,
we need each other because we will, we will get attacked.
Yeah. In nature, the wolf pack is considered a keystone species because they balance the ecosystem. If animals are unhealthy, they'll remove the illness from the herd. You know, if
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there was a big project in I want to say Montana, Alberta, British Columbia, because wolves were hunted into extinction, and they had to reintroduce them because it was leading to outbreaks of disease amongst deer, elk, rabbits, you name it. So
Yep. And it's same thing needs to happen here, in this constant state of war, funneling billions of dollars into, Lockheed Martin and all the just military industrial complex is a bunch of drivens just trying to get rich and feel powerful.
well, and I think it's safe to say that COVID was all about the enrichment of the few at the expense of the many.
Exactly. And under the guise of doing it of what's best for most.
Yeah.
So the last, very simply, I break this into three. It's health, basic physical health. And, what we're doing the practices and really building this focus on. You have health practices, you have romance or relational practices, and then you have finance practices. And we break that into 11 different areas or 36 different areas. But, drivens in particular are really good at keeping this limiting experience of bandwidth. We don't tolerate a safe world. We're designed for a scary, hard world. And so we may optimize our health. We may have an okay relationship, but our finances are for I'm doing Ironmans, but I'm not making any money. Or the opposite, where I'm making, $1 million a month, my relationship's okay, but I'm 250 pounds, and I'm dying. So it's really this whole life perspective. What are we manifesting? And again, going back to how I change, it has to be one drop at a time. Because lottery winners blow their worlds up. And so as we are able to, tolerate these good sensations in our body, we can then manifest more and more and more. Health is limitless, romance is limitless, and so is finance. This is the key part of it, in that identity, what we're selling is clarity, confidence, and power. And this clarity comes from the practices. And clarity comes from the stronger our soul is able to see reality. That's clarity. And that's a stable central nervous system. More importantly, seeing through our emotion. You can't get rid of your emotion, but seeing, if I'm feeling good about it, if I'm feeling bad about it, I have snakes and sticks. We never have self-confidence. We are not building pride. What we are doing, we have confidence in the practices. That is such a key concept, that if I do the work, I take ownership of my part in it, I'm seeing my part in it, and I put new routines in place to catch this, I can manifest anything. I can change my health. I can change but what does come back into the person is this sense of power. And it's not personal power. It's an efficacy that I can affect my world completely. Now that I know my problem and I can develop more clarity, and what happens eventually is this center where they're all coming together in an absolute, it's literally, we're becoming more and more like Christ. And that, our reactions are coming from a place of righteousness and love and tolerance and all of these higher things. And we have the confidence that, I can build a process to create any kind of world I want. And I have the efficacy and I have the power to do it.
Well, I would argue there's a stability there too, because you've built the foundation on the practices.
Yep.
It's not like, I don't know. I feel like sometimes I build towers of, it's like a Jenga tower and you're like pulling things out going, I hope it doesn't fall.
Exactly. And you come down to that foundational, it's just foundation of, that I have, well, as the Buddha says, the path, staying on the path as a rigid practice is not the point. You come back to the path.